Hi again, everybody. As I said earlier, my name is Kelly Shushock, and I'm the grateful pastor here at Edges. For any of you who are associated with any colleges in the area, I'd like to thank you for making Edges your spring break destination. It's kind of you to show up with us this week. When we got to this room this morning, it was 58 degrees in here, so you can thank God for that little miracle by the 10:30 service. The 8:30 people literally just froze in their seats, so we are glad to be at a different spot. This week I've been thinking some about celebrations. I don't know how many of you have had a celebration in your family recently. There are things like graduations and birthdays and retirements and weddings and babies. I don't know how your families do celebrations, but I would like to tell you today about one of our family celebrations. It's a big party, and our extended family has it every single year. So this party that I'd like to tell you about, it lasts for a full week. How many of you have family celebrations that last a full week? Some of you do. Well, our family celebration is full of food and singing and dancing, sometimes all at the same time, a little karaoke. But this party that we have that lasts a week long, it's not just a for-nothing party. It actually has a big point, a purpose. And the whole point is to remember this time that happened in our family. It was a long time ago, and it was an against all odds season where our ancestors made their way to joy after a period of long darkness. I don't know if any of you have family stories that include large patches of darkness, but I suspect it's true for most of us in the room. And I don't know if you get to the other side of your darkness and have a large celebration, but I'd like to commend it to you as an idea. So the specifics of our family story go something like this. A long time ago, our family was in deep trouble, real trouble. And all of life, every single day, seemed like a never-ending night. And then somehow, by some miracle, really, that we didn't initiate, we somehow escaped the worst of the darkness with the help of a person, just one person who could see the light, who believed and who championed and who somehow convinced our family that God was on the side of freedom and hope for everyone. That that's what God was always doing and what God would do for our family. He persuaded us that God only offers life, and that God always offers life, and that God would bring us through to that promise, the promise of life and hope, even though at the time we already felt like we were dead. I don't know if any of you have ever felt like that, like you're kind of a dead person walking. Well, anyway, that's where we were, but we believed, and so we followed him. And I'm not going to lie, there was a long, dark distance between the risky escape and the promised land. Sometimes there's a long distance in the dark. And during that time, it was really hard to see the light or to trust God. And it wasn't quick and it wasn't easy. It was like decades. I'm not talking weeks. But somehow our lonely, lost in the dark little family wound up in the land of promise. And it was a surprise to all of us when it seemed like the light of the whole world was again available to us. And so we celebrate every year. In addition to all the singing and all the dancing and all the food, we put light everywhere in the party. Every day, every night, candles, tiki poles, light everywhere you look. because it's the palpable sign to us that the awful season was not forever, and that the darkness didn't ultimately win. So the whole thing, the whole party helps us to remember our family story. And in our family, we've all learned to trust it in different ways because we've experienced that story, some of us dozens of times over. Not just once. But there is this crazy theme that we have learned to trust will always be true. And the theme is this: God is always on the other side of the darkness. God is always the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how long the tunnel is. Now, by our family, I mean our Jewish brothers and sisters, our family, our long history. And these brothers and sisters have been remembering and claiming this same story arc since the biblical story, which was often called the Exodus. Some of you now may recognize the story. It's one of the most riveting Bible stories, and it's in the book by that name. And no one has ever told you before that Exodus is riveting. So you should just go look up that book in the Bible and see what you can find about this story. So the party is called Sukkot. I don't know if you've ever heard the word before, but now you'll know to look for it. It's not spelled that way, but the pronunciation is Sukkot. And it means the festival of booths. And it's called that because at this festival, even to this day, in this very year, there will be people around the world who are celebrating Sukkot, the festival of the booths. And part of what they'll do to celebrate and to have the big party I was talking about is, yes, the singing and the dancing and the food and the light. And also, people build these makeshift tents, or booths, they call them. And the booths are the reminders that the wilderness that they wandered in was temporary. It was makeshift. It was not permanent. And so they build these little booths as a reminder of how God told them they needed to live for a time, but not forever. And so during the festival, they eat and sometimes sleep in these little booths, the reminder that the darkness is always temporary and there's light always on the other side. And this helps all the people in the family to remember the great I am. These statements that we're talking about every week between now and Easter, they help the people to remember a God who is a present light, who's always at the beginning of the story, and who is always at the end of everything. And the whole festival helps the people to remember that light is the permanent thing, and darkness is the temporary thing. In the whole scheme, darkness is the temporary thing. So one year, during the Sukkot party, God was actually physically living on the earth in the form of Jesus. And so Jesus, when he lived on the earth, went to his own party, right? Because that's what you would do. So we can read about this season of the party in John chapter 7 and chapter 8. You might miss that it was during the party if you've not known to look for it, but you can go back and look in your text. And I was supposed to find the page number that it was on. Could somebody find the page number on the table Bibles where John 8:12 is? Not that you couldn't find it yourself, but sometimes it just helps. And this is like a little Bible trivia around here for those of you who care about Bible trivia. Does anybody have John chapter 8, verse 12? 6:15. Thank you, Bible scholar, whoever you are in the room. We appreciate it. All right, so before the part on page 615, Jesus goes to his own party. And in the middle of the party, it seemed that some of the people who were there had forgotten what the party was for that year. They had forgotten the themes that we just talked about, the meaning of the celebration, because there was this woman who was at the party and she was caught up in darkness. Have you ever been in a room full of seemingly happy people and you can just tell that one of them is not okay? So this is that woman. She's full of shame, and it's showing all over her. Only it's a party. And so everybody at the party, what are they doing? They're gossiping about the woman. And then somebody confronts the woman right in the middle of the party. And instead of helping that woman remember the promises of Sukkot, the people at the party wanted to punish that woman, and they wanted to make her darkness permanent. They forgot. They thought that was the story that you pay with darkness. But Jesus found her, and he retold her the family story, how light and life are always possible, even for her. And he didn't pretend with her that the walk out wouldn't be long and hard. He didn't mince any words, but he did promise her that God will never unpromise life to anyone. And the partygoers were pissed. But then, in the party gone wrong moment, after the woman caught in adultery, you may know the story by that name. And then in that party gone wrong context, with sweat and adrenaline and music blaring in the background, with torches and fire and huts that had lost their meaning by now, a voice was heard over the crowd. John 8, verse 12. Jesus spoke to the people again, saying, I am the light of the world. Her world. Your world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus said, I am your story. You have forgotten it, but I am your story. I am present to you. I am available to you. I am forever for you. All of you. So, if this is our family story, it would mean that whenever we lose our ability to remember or to believe, Jesus steps into our parties gone wrong. Jesus steps into our lives when they've gone south. Jesus steps into every room that no longer holds any oxygen. Jesus steps into our white-knuckled moments where we are terrified and full of nothing but fear to remind us that we have a permanent promise of life and love, whether we remember it or not. It is our proof of I am. And I think this is necessary because we are tempted to believe a great lie. We get sold a bill of goods sometimes, a story that is not ours. And that story goes something like this. It's the story where we begin with life. And the arc that we travel with that life is full of moments, some of them light and some of them dark. And we are tempted to believe that that trajectory is ultimately always headed south until one day when the light is extinguished and we meet death. And that's the life trajectory, like this. But that story arc is a lie. If I am the light of the world is true before and after, beginning and ending, always and forever, if it's true, then we begin with the light of life. And we travel through, all of us. We have good moments and dark moments. And sometimes we have dark, very, very dark moments. And sometimes the darkness can be long and windy, and there are only tiny glimmers of light. Sometimes it can be decades long. And sometimes it can feel permanent. It can feel like that's our forever story, the one that heads toward darkness, that we weren't destined for life, that light is not ours to have, that we've done too much wrong, we've been so many places wrong, we've experienced so much hardship. It can seem like we are dead people walking. It can seem permanent. But the one who is present, available, and forever is in charge actually of the journey and is taking us home beyond the darkness to a promised land where there is light enough for the whole world. And the ark looks like this. Whatever the darkness is, whether it's the death of your dream, if you've got a kid in real trouble, if you've been through a divorce that feels like it took your life away, if you've had a crisis of unbelief that you cannot shake, if you have loneliness that is unending and seems there's no end in sight, if you have any form of disorder or addiction or pain, which we all have, hear this. The final word in your story is not darkness. The final word is not death. The trajectory is not barreling toward darkness as the final product of your life. The life that we're all living, it is, yes, a blip on the line. There is so much more, and God means for it to add toward life for you. If not now, then forever for all of us. It is the promise when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, now and forever. So the ark is always ultimately in the direction of hope. Even in the middle of whatever darkness you're feeling, the ark is headed toward hope. It is the story. It is the promise that God gives. It is the story God's writing. And so, as hard as it is to believe, and as gently as it sometimes must be whispered, there are some places where you cannot just look someone in the eye and say, well, just keep hoping, it'll all get better. Sometimes it's a gentle whisper. Even in things like world tragedies, the kind most of us know nothing about. What about forced starvation of whole people groups, children? Wars without end. What about all forms of persistent oppression or temporary oppression? What about people who don't have enough of anything? What about every place where we write ourselves what seems like an indelible, horrific history? Even then, there is an ultimate promise on the far side of that darkness. I was, I am, and I will be the light for the world. It may not be visible now. The wandering wilderness may persist for a long night, but light is coming now and forever. This is our family story. There are years when you can celebrate it at the party because you have known it to be true, and there are other years when you have to cling on to what is good for dear life, because you cannot see it, but trusting that it is true is the definition of our faith. It's why our family journal, in the introduction to the portion of our story that we read today, reads, hear it like your family wrote it. Your family wrote it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And that Word, it was God. He was with God in the beginning. And then through him all things were made. And without him nothing was made that has been made. He holds it all. And in him, in this making, was life. And that life was the light of all humankind. And that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it. Ever. Amen. We come to this table every week because